I had the Zcam E2-M4 for about a year, really about a year and a half. I sold it recently to get another cinema camera, but I did want to give my thoughts on my first cinema camera, my experience with that, and what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and why ultimately I ended up selling it. Before we jump in today, my name is Angela. I'm a creator based in Durham, North Carolina, and this review is not going to be a spec heavy review. It's not a horror story review. It's really just my perspective and opinion having a modular camera as my first cinema camera, and some things you may be considering if you're in the market for a cinema camera like the Zcam E2-M4 or any other box style camera. So for me, there were a lot of things that I really liked about it, so we'll start with the positives and then end with the negatives, and maybe you can kind of see why from that trajectory why I ended up selling it. For me, I really did and was attracted to the modularity of a box style camera. I didn't necessarily and still don't use raw codecs, but just having a box that I could build up or break down depending on the shoot and depending on my needs was really attractive to me. Something that was ultimately customizable for whatever project I was working on at that time, whether that be recording a video podcast or working on a short film or something like that. So having those two functionalities in mind was what I was looking at when I got the camera, and what I was thinking of as I started to build it out and started to use it regularly for projects. Being able to have 4K 120 and 4K 160. There are not many cameras that have those codecs, if any. So that was really interesting to see. And because Zcam has been on the market for a little while, there are a lot of accessories that you can buy to make it closer to a full frame kind of field of use. They're speed boosters. They have their own native Zcam turbo mount, and it's a locking turbo mount, which is awesome. So a lot of security for your lenses. I had EF lenses already, so being able to pair those with the Zcam was really nice. I didn't have to buy new lenses to work with this. So all of that in a body, when the body itself, just the brain, is less than $2,000, was amazing for me at the time. Once I broke it down, it was fairly easy to travel with. I could throw it in a Pelican. It wasn't super heavy to hold around or manhandle for 20-minute interview. I wouldn't recommend it, but I've done it. Probably in hindsight would have gotten something else because I did build it up fairly big for that. Go still, I love the image out of it. I love being able to use it and have a small profile when I was kind of hanging out around people and getting pretty close to them and asking them pretty vulnerable questions. So that was really nice about it. And you could be asking yourself, well, all these things sound great. It sounds like a great camera. Why would you get anything differently? That's a great question, first of all. Let's talk about some things that I wasn't really feeling so much. So on this camera, there's only one CFast recording slot. It's not the end of the world, but it wasn't great either because you pretty much had to be relying on having enough media for whatever it is you needed for that shoot. So if I was recording a video podcast episode or multiple video podcast episodes in one day in person, like I pretty much just had to rely on the fact that that CFast card was going to last me that whole day, which maybe sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes I had to just bring my laptop and know that I had to dump footage in between shoots, and that's just kind of how it was. But that again can be like slowing you down a little bit if you're trying to do more than one thing in a day. For whatever reason, the footage from the Zcam would not play back properly on my M1 MacBook. I was never able to figure it out. It plays just fine on my PC, but for whatever reason, the MacBook and the Zcam footage just did not go together. And to be specific, what I mean is in Premiere. It would play back in QuickTime, but then I'd pull it into Premiere and it would look like some glitchy, blotchy, disgusting mess you never ever want to see. So I'm not sure where the disconnect in the talking was, but I was using this on a fairly intensive campaign for a couple months, and not being able to edit on the go was actually really rough. So that kind of, again, for my workflow and my needs, that was the rough part. I could dump footage, but I couldn't really edit it and turn it around quickly if I needed to get a clip out for social or something like that. So that was a hindrance from my workflow at the time, that I was using it pretty heavily. Yes, while I did like that I could build it up or break it down, the fact that I had to build it up and break it down every time I wanted to use it, because the screen that comes on the Zcam E2-M4 is like not useful for actually monitoring when you're recording. That to me got really cumbersome, having to break it down and build it up. Started to think that it would be nice for me to have something that I can just at least have a base package that I can just like pull out of the box, pull out of my Pelican and use. And then if I want to break it down or I want to build it up, I can do that as well. It looks cool, I guess, but and you can build, to me, a more weight balanced rig when you're rigging it yourself versus like a lot of the cameras that come out of the box, like the Canon cinema line or the Sony cinema line. You can build a lot more evenly weight distributed camera, but to me it just wasn't worth it after a couple months of doing that continuously. It's got old. I'm not a fan of the rig. I said it. That's controversial, but here it is. This next one is really applicable to any box style camera currently that I know of right now. None of them have internal ND. And for me, it wasn't a deal breaker at the time. Like, I went into it knowing no box cameras had that, so either way I was gonna be stuck dealing with that. Having to use a matte box and change out the matte box every time I changed a lens, that was really annoying and just one more thing that slows you down. And for reference, I do a lot of documentary films. I do a lot of outdoor documentary films. And so like really like in the grand scheme of things, that extra minute and a half it takes to make sure you have the right step up ring that goes with the matte box, it just, for each lens, it really got like annoying. And this is coming from somebody who's used the Canon mirrorless, and I had the Canon VND mount, like filter mount, so RF to EF, but also like a VND filter mount. So even that for me, because even though I would change the lenses, I wouldn't have to change like anything else in order to have that VND. So having to go through that process with the matte box, I like the matte box. I have the Tilta matte box. I still love the matte box. But in that context, it just wasn't working out for me. In order to allow me to move quickly and that sort of thing, it just was kind of at opposite ends with that. So ultimately for me and my use cases, it just wasn't really working out. I wanted something a little more easier to run with. Some run and gun stuff, so that automatically knocked out the red Komodo. I knew that wasn't going to be my next camera, even though it does have that RF mount, so I could potentially still use that VND mount from Canon. Just the fact that I would have to rig it up every time I wanted to use it just wasn't really appealing to me, because also the screen on the red camera isn't really usable. And in the Panasonic box series, neither one of them have screens at all, so you would really have to be forced to get a screen with that one. So those were kind of just my issues with it. Maybe you'll find out in a future video what I ended up getting for my next camera, and I'll talk more about that and why that complements the camera that I'm using now, the Fuji X-T4. But until then, let me know your thoughts. I hope this helps if you're in the market for a Z-Cam or considering any box style camera, and would love to see you guys in my next video. So please be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned.